Chapter 1. The Light That Deceives. Hercule Poirot had not, in 30 years of investigative work, taken a holiday that remained a holiday. He had attempted several. He had selected, on each occasion, a location of genuine beauty and genuine remoteness, had packed his most comfortable clothes and his best supply of tisane sachets, and had proceeded to the selected location with sincere intentions. What happened subsequently wasn't, he felt, entirely his fault. He was simply a man in whom the grey cells refused to go on holiday even when the rest of him had been instructed to. Trevaunance Cove, in the 3rd week of September 1935, was as beautiful as its reputation. The village clung to the Cornish cliff-tops with the casual confidence of something that has been there long enough to be certain it belongs. Its whitewashed cottages arranged along lanes so narrow that two people with differing opinions could barely pass each other without negotiation. Below, the Atlantic made its permanent argument with the granite, losing with great enthusiasm and repeating the attempt immediately. The light, and it was the light that the painters came for, the particular quality of Cornish coastal light that changes every 20 minutes and is never the same twice and somehow always exactly itself, fell on everything with the lavish impartiality of something that has no preferences and no agenda. Poirot had taken rooms at the Trevaunance Arms, which was a public house of remarkable antiquity and moderate comfort, and whose landlady, Mrs. Penrose, had received him with the carefully calibrated warmth of a woman who appreciated custom and was reserving judgment on the specific customer. He had been there 3 days. He had walked, cautiously, with appropriate footwear, along the cliff path. He had drunk his morning tisane, looking at the sea. He had read, with genuine pleasure, 2 novels he had purchased at the station bookstall in Truro. He had been, in every material sense, on holiday. And then, on the afternoon of the 4th day, he had encountered Cornelius Blackwell. The encounter happened on the cliff path, which was sufficiently dramatic in setting to suit the man it introduced. Blackwell was 63, large in all dimensions, height, girth, voice, gesture. The physical space he occupied and the psychological space he appropriated, with a great mane of white hair that the sea wind was currently treating with complete irreverence. He was painting. He painted, as he apparently did everything, with total, aggressive commitment, the brush moving with the force of someone conducting an argument rather than creating an image. The canvas on his portable easel showed the cove below, in colours that were simultaneously accurate and extreme, as though the painter had seen the scene's objective reality and then shown it something better. He turned when Poirot approached, not because Poirot had made any sound, but with the instinct of a man who always knows when he is being observed, and looked at him with the penetrating attention of someone who sees faces professionally. "You're the detective," Blackwell said. "The Belgian one. I've seen your photograph in the papers." "I am on holiday," Poirot said, with the dignity of someone making a statement they know will not be credited. Blackwell laughed, a large, encompassing laugh that the wind caught and dispersed along the cliff-top. "No such thing for men like us. Come and look at what I'm doing." Poirot came and looked. The painting was extraordinary. It was not merely the technical quality, though that was evident even to a man whose expertise in visual art was more philosophical than practical, but the quality of the seeing behind it. Blackwell had looked at this specific arrangement of water and rock and light and had somehow extracted from it not the picturesque version, but the true one, the indifference of the sea, to the geological patience of the cliff, the quality of the light as something neither warm nor cold but simply relentless. "You see what I mean to do," Blackwell said. It was not a question. "I see what you have done," Poirot said, "which is to paint the truth of the thing rather than its appearance." Blackwell looked at him with a different quality of attention, the attention of someone encountering an unexpected intelligence. "Come to Cliffside this evening," he said. "I'm having people. It should be interesting." "I am on holiday," Poirot said again. "And I," Blackwell said, turning back to his canvas. "I'm about to turn 64 and intend to do something before I do. That will be either the finest thing I have ever made or will get me killed. Possibly both." He applied a stroke of grey to the cliff face with complete authority.
"Come at 7. Mrs. Penrose will tell you where it is." Poirot went at 7. He told himself this was because the grey cells required exercise regardless of his personal preferences. He told himself this with considerably less conviction than he would have wished. Cliffside was a cottage of the kind that Cornish painters inhabited in the way that certain birds inhabit particular trees, not because no other would serve, but because this one had become, through long occupation, an extension of the occupant's personality. It stood at the cliff's edge with a specific disregard for its own structural safety that characterized its owner, and the studio attached to its northern side was lit, even at 7 in the evening, with the careful illumination of a man who took light as seriously as his life.
The guests were already assembled in the cottage's main room. Large by Cornish cottage standards, dense with paintings on every wall surface, smelling of turpentine and old wood and the sea air that entered through every gap the building's age had opened in its fabric. They looked at Poirot with the varied expressions of people who had expected an evening of artistic conversation and were recalibrating towards something less predictable. Poirot looked at each of them in turn, with the quiet, comprehensive attention that he brought to all first encounters, which was the attention of a man cataloguing for future reference rather than merely being sociable. He noted 7 people. He would, in the days to come, require very detailed notes on all of them. The evening passed pleasantly.
Blackwell's hospitality was generous, and his conversation was the conversation of a man who has strong opinions about everything and has been right often enough to have stopped apologizing for having them. Poirot ate his smoked mackerel. Cornwall's contribution to the list of genuinely excellent English foods was, he had discovered, more substantial than the list as a whole, and listened and observed. Later, walking back along the cliff path in the September dark, with the sea invisible below but continuously audible, Poirot permitted himself to acknowledge that the grey cells had already begun their work. There was something in that assembled company, something in the quality of the attention each person brought to Cornelius Blackwell and the specific quality of their ease or unease in his presence. That had the texture of accumulated significance. He went to bed. He lay in the dark listening to the sea. He thought about a man who painted the truth of things and had announced with complete composure that this habit might get him killed. The grey cells, against all his instructions, were very much awake. Chapter 2. Portraits of the Living. The studio at Cliffside occupied its northern attachment with the seriousness of a room that has been designed for a single purpose and has achieved it. The northern light, painter's light, the consistent, shadowless illumination that falls from a sky rather than a sun and does not move through the day with the sun's shifting agenda, came through the long windows with the quality of something that had been ordered specifically and had arrived exactly right. The room smelled of linseed oil and turpentine and the particular dry smell of many canvases, the accumulated fragrance of years of making. Cornelius Blackwell received Poirot in the studio the following morning, which was a Thursday, and the Thursday light was as good as Wednesday's had been, which was very good indeed. He was not painting. He was standing before a large canvas covered with a heavy cloth, the painting Poirot assumed, the one Blackwell had spoken of on the cliff path, and he was looking at it with an expression that Poirot found interesting. Not the satisfaction of a creator regarding completed work, but the specific expression of a man who has done something and is in the process of deciding whether he has the courage to continue doing it. "You wanted to show me something," Poirot said. "I wanted to talk," Blackwell said. He moved away from the covered canvas and sat on the paint-stained wooden stool that appeared to be his habitual perch, and looked at Poirot with the assessing directness that he applied to everything. "About my guests, about what I intend to do at the unveiling on Saturday evening." "You said it might get you killed," Poirot said pleasantly. I have been thinking about that since yesterday evening. Have you? Blackwell looked at the covered canvas. I have spent my life painting portraits, 60 years of looking at faces. What most portrait painters do, what clients want and what the tradition supports, is flattery, the technical execution of a lie. You take a person and you paint the version of them they wish to exist. The authority without the vanity, the beauty without the calculation, the dignity without the fear. He paused. I have done this. I have done it well enough to make a considerable living and a considerable reputation. And for the last 2 years, I have been done with it. The final painting, Poirot said. The final painting is different. It is the 7 people who are here this week as they actually are, not as they wish to be seen. Not as I have seen them in the commissions I have done for them, which have been, in every case, a negotiated lie. He looked at Poirot with the eyes of a man who has made a decision he cannot unmake. I have painted each of them with the thing they carry, the thing they do not show, the thing they have paid me, in various ways, to keep hidden in the portraits they commissioned. He paused. I have also, in each of their faces, he included a specific detail that only they will recognize, a reference to the specific truth I know about them. Invisible to everyone else, visible to them. You intend to exhibit this painting. I intend to unveil it on Saturday evening in front of all of them simultaneously. Poirot considered this for a moment with the grey cell's full attention. And you have invited me, he said, because you believe one of them may respond to this unveiling with something more than discomfort. I believe, Blackwell said, with a directness that was either courageous or reckless, and possibly both, that at least 2 of the people in this house have reasons to prevent that painting from being shown, and I believe that you being here will either prevent them from acting or ensure that if they do act,
As someone with the appropriate capabilities is present. You are using me as a deterrent, Poirot said, or as an insurance policy. Blackwell smiled, a large, undeterred smile. I prefer the latter framing. It suggests more confidence in the outcome. He introduced Poirot properly to the gathered guests that morning at breakfast on the terrace where the September sun fell warmly on the white-painted table and the sea below made its perpetual silver statement. The introduction was conducted with the casualness of a man who was pretending not to have arranged it deliberately. Lady Sylvia Rowe was 55 and beautiful with the specific quality of someone who has always been beautiful and has made practical decisions accordingly.
She had the warmth of a woman who has learned that warmth is an effective instrument and has been applying it for long enough that the instrument and the genuine article had become difficult to distinguish. She received Poirot with great charm and almost no reaction to his name, which was itself a reaction of significance. Edmund Frost was the art critic, thin, precise, with spectacles that were either a genuine visual necessity or a professional prop, possibly both, and a mouth that had the compressed quality of a man who has spent his career delivering verdicts and has found that verdicts are more powerful when economically expressed. He shook Poirot's hand with the brevity of a man for whom social rituals were obligations rather than pleasures, and said that he had read about one of Poirot's cases in a periodical. He made this sound like a mild criticism. Miss Arabella Vane was 27, and the quality of her talent was visible even to Poirot, who was not a specialist, in the way that genuine ability in any field carries a specific signature that the attentive observer can recognize without technical knowledge. She was looking at everything, the sea, the terrace, the other guests, the quality of the morning light, with the focused attention of someone for whom the visible world was a constant, urgent source of data. She greeted Poirot with genuine warmth and the slight distraction of someone whose primary attention is always elsewhere. Dr. Stephen Holt was 60, with the measured manner of a physician who has learned that the manner itself is part of the treatment, and the specific quality behind the manner of a man managing a complicated internal situation with professional tools. He and Cornelius Blackwell had the ease of 40-year friendships, which is an ease that contains within it the full record of 40 years and has learned not to require any of it to be explicitly present. Julian Blackwell had his father's large physical frame and none of his father's ease in it. He was 31 and sat at the breakfast table with the quality of someone who has been placed in proximity to a person they find difficult and is managing this through a combination of social performance and internal distance. He spoke when spoken to, contributed intelligently, and looked at his father with an expression that was neither hatred nor love, but the more exhausting third thing that combines elements of both. Mrs.
Petra Voss was the art dealer, German, immaculate, with the specific manner of someone operating in a world of international commerce who has learned to present themselves as belonging to every room they enter, regardless of what room it actually is. She spoke English with precision and a slight formality that was either the product of a second language well mastered or of a first language carefully managed. She looked at the sea with the expression of someone who finds natural beauty aesthetically interesting but financially irrelevant. Tom Chegwidden, the handyman, factotum, and what appeared to be Cliffside's entire domestic staff, brought the tea and toast and additional eggs with the quiet efficiency of a man who has been doing these things for 15 years and expects to continue. He was 50, solid, Cornish to the bone.
And he looked at the assembled guests with the calm assessment of someone who has learned that the quality of people can be judged by how they treat the person bringing their breakfast. Poirot, drinking his tisane and observing the terrace with its 7 people and their 7 distinct arrangements of concealment and performance, thought about what Blackwell had said. The painting under the cloth in the studio, the specific truths it contained. The grey cells were not on holiday. They had not been on holiday since Tuesday. They were, at this moment, working with the focused intensity of a mechanism that has been given a problem and has recognized it as interesting. The sea below the terrace threw its light upward in shifting patterns. The September morning was very fine. 7 people ate their breakfast and performed their social selves and carried their specific private weights, and none of them yet knew that by Saturday evening the carrying would be over. Chapter 3. What the canvas knew. The days before a revelation have a specific quality that Poirot had learned to recognize over many years. A density of apparently ordinary time, each hour conducting its normal business, while beneath the surface something moves with the purposeful patience of a tide. The guests at Cliffside went about the activities of a Cornish September week. Walks along the cliff path, sketching sessions in the cove below, evenings on the terrace with the kind of conversation that serves as both entertainment and reconnaissance. And beneath all of it, the studio sat with its covered canvas and its accumulated truths and waited. Poirot used these days well. He used them in the manner that had served him throughout his career, not with urgent activity, but with the quality of apparently relaxed attention that allowed people to speak more freely than they intended. He walked with each guest in turn. He sat at the terrace table in the evenings and contributed to the general conversation while conducting, beneath it, a series of private investigations. He walked with Arabella Vane on the Thursday afternoon, along the lower path where the sea came within reach of the rocks and the spray made periodic contributions to any conversation conducted near it. Arabella walked as she did everything, with full attention to the visual world. Making small notations in a pocket sketchbook with the automatic quality of a musician who hums when they think. "You have studied with Cornelius Blackwell for 3 years, Poirot said. 2.5. She made a quick mark in the sketchbook, the angle of a particular rock against the sea. He's the finest painter alive. What he can see in a face, there's no one else doing what he does. And what he taught you, his technique. The specific approach to light and shadow in portraiture that distinguishes his work." She stopped walking. She did not look at him, but the sketchbook stopped moving. "Who told you?" "No one told me," I observed. "You speak of his technique with the precision of someone who knows it from inside, who has practiced it, applied it, made it their own. But there is occasionally, when you speak of it, a quality of pause. The pause of someone whose relationship with a thing they love has become complicated." She began walking again. He told me 2 months ago that the technique, the specific glazing method that he's known for, the way the light builds in the shadows, isn't his. It was developed by a painter named Caspar Weil in Munich in the 1910s. Weil never published his method. He was killed in the war. Blackwell studied with him for 6 months in 1913 and took the method and built his entire career on it. She paused. He told me as if he was confessing something, as if telling me made it less wrong. Another pause. It didn't. And the painting. The painting will show this somehow. He said each face in it contains a reference to its specific truth. I don't know what he's put in mine.
But I can imagine. She looked at the sea. I've been using Weil's technique without knowing it was stolen. Every painting I've made in 3 years is built on a lie I didn't know was a lie, which is its own kind of problem. Poirot's conversation with Edmund Frost took place in the cottage's sitting room on the Friday morning, when rain had arrived from the Atlantic with the thorough commitment of Cornish rain, and the terrace was no longer an option. Frost sat in the chair by the fire, with his customary compression, and accepted tea with the expression of a man performing a social courtesy while conserving his actual attention for something more important. Blackwell intends to write about me, Frost said, before Poirot had spoken. He said this with the resigned directness of someone who has decided that preempting the question is more efficient than waiting for it. He told me in his letter when he invited me here. He said he was planning a memoir. Not the kind of memoir that portrait painters write, which are generally exercises in selective flattery of one's subjects, a real one, with real accounts. And your specific concern. Frost looked at the fire. In 1928, I wrote a review that ended a painter's career. Oliver Mead, you won't know the name, which is rather the point. He was producing work of considerable originality that was not, at the time, fashionable. And I wrote about it in terms that the market interpreted as dismissive, which was partly what I intended and partly the consequence of my own limited understanding of what he was doing. He paused.
He stopped painting. He lives in Exeter and works in insurance and has not painted since 1929. And you have reconsidered your assessment. I reconsidered it about 18 months after I published it, when I looked at one of his canvases in a private collection and understood what I had not understood when I reviewed it. I have reconsidered it every year since. He looked at Poirot. Blackwell knows. He knew Mead. He told me, when he invited me here, that he intended to include the matter in his memoir with full details. He paused. He also told me that I was welcome to make my own statement first if I wished. He said he preferred voluntary correction to forced exposure. And you have not made the statement. I have been considering how to make it in a way that is honest without being professionally fatal. He looked at the fire. There may not be such a way. Blackwell seemed to think there was. He said honesty, properly conducted, was never professionally fatal. He said this with a confidence I found characteristic and not entirely convincing. Dr. Stephen Holt spoke to Poirot on the Friday evening, in the garden behind the cottage where the rain had stopped and the September dark was full of the smell of wet grass and salt air. He was not performing his physician's ease. He had the look of a man who has been managing something for a very long time and is approaching the outer limits of his capacity for management. He is going to tell them, Holt said, looking at the dark garden, about Catherine Blackwell, Julian's mother, Cornelius's wife, dead in 1922. Poirot had made inquiries. The circumstances of her death, Poirot said carefully, were not as they appeared. Holt looked at his hands. I was her physician. I signed the death certificate. The cause I gave as a progressive cardiac condition was technically accurate in the sense that her heart had stopped. It was not accurate in the sense that the stopping of her heart had been assisted. He was quiet for a moment. She asked me. She had been ill for 4 years. She was in pain that I could manage but not resolve, and she was 37, and she asked me, very clearly and with complete intelligence, to help her. And Cornelius knew. Cornelius held her hand. He stopped. It was done with complete love,
complete clarity, complete intention on everyone's part. It was also, in the eyes of the law, a criminal act. By me, certainly. By Cornelius, arguably. He looked at the dark sky. Julian has always believed his father's neglect killed his mother. Cornelius has carried the truth, the real truth, for 13 years because telling it would expose me, and he would not do that. He paused. Now he is going to tell it. He says Julian deserves to know what actually happened and that the truth, even this truth, is better than what Julian believes, and the legal risk to you. 13 years is a long time. The witnesses, other than Cornelius and myself, are gone. But the admission itself, he stopped. I am 60. I have 30 years of patients who are alive because I kept them so. I am not primarily concerned with the legal risk. He looked at Poirot. I am concerned with whether the truth in this case is actually better than what exists without it. Cornelius believes it always is. I have spent my life in medicine, and I am less certain. It was, Poirot thought, walking back into the warm cottage, a genuine question. He did not have a general answer. He had, in this specific case, a growing sense of the architecture of what Saturday evening would contain. And it was an architecture of considerable dramatic force and at least 2 points of genuine structural danger. The studio at the end of the cottage stood in the Friday night with its covered canvas and its 7 accumulated truths, and the sea beyond it made its continuous argument with the land, and the Cornish dark was very quiet and very complete.
Chapter 4. The Dealer's Inventory. Mrs. Petra Voss conducted herself with the specific efficiency of a woman who has learned that efficiency is its own form of authority and who applies it to every domain of her life, professional, social, personal, with the thoroughness of someone for whom compromise between the ideal and the available is not a comfortable mode of operation. She was 48, and everything about her, from the cut of her coat to the precision of her English, communicated a person who had determined what she wanted from the world and had pursued it with the organized intelligence of a trained professional. She was also, Poirot had concluded by the end of Thursday, the most dangerous person in the house. Not in the melodramatic sense, though he had not yet ruled that out, but in the practical sense, the person whose specific exposure stood to cost the most in the most immediate and non-negotiable terms. Lady Sylvia's secret, whatever it was, threatened her social position. Edmund Frost's admission threatened his professional reputation. Dr. Holt's truth carried legal risk that 13 years had substantially attenuated. But Mrs. Voss's situation was different in kind, not merely in degree. He found his opportunity on the Saturday morning, the day of the unveiling, when the household was in various states of preparation and distraction, and Mrs. Voss was in the garden performing what appeared to be a review of her own thoughts, walking the small perimeter of the cottage garden with the contained,
purposeful stride of someone pacing a very specific problem. She saw him coming and did not change her expression, which was itself a form of expression. You have been dealing in Cornelius Blackwell's work for 11 years, Poirot said, falling into step beside her. 12, she said, with the precision of someone who corrects as a reflex. And in that time, the volume of Blackwell works appearing through your galleries in Frankfurt and Vienna has exceeded, by a considerable margin, the volume that Blackwell himself has produced. A pause of 2 seconds, which was long enough. The market for his earlier works has been very active. Private sales, estate consignments, forgeries, Poirot said, with the pleasantness he deployed when the word he was using required no additional emphasis from his tone. The garden was very still. The sea made its perpetual sound beyond the cliff edge. 23, Poirot continued. That is the number Blackwell told me in a conversation on Thursday evening. 23 works sold under his name through your operations in a style sufficiently close to his own to satisfy buyers who were not, in some cases, examining the provenance as carefully as they might. He paused. The style was close because the person who made the forgeries had studied his technique with considerable thoroughness. which points to a very small number of people, given how carefully he guards his specific method. Mrs. Voss had stopped walking. She stood in the garden with the absolute stillness of a person in the moment between something happening and their response to it.
And in that stillness, Poirot could see the full quality of her intelligence working, rapid, cold, precise, through the available options. "He told you the number," she said finally. "He told me because he wished me to understand the full extent of what Saturday evening would address. He said 23 works, a span of 9 years, and a sum of money from the sales that he described as considerable. And the forger is not you," Poirot said. "You are the dealer, the commercial mechanism. The forgeries themselves were made by someone with a painter's skill. I have been thinking about this since Thursday, and the person with the closest access to Blackwell's specific technique, the stolen vial method, which produces a very distinctive approach to light, is the same person who was told 2 months ago that the technique was stolen." Mrs. Voss looked at him. "Arabella Vane did not make the forgeries for me," she said. "She does not know about my arrangements. She stopped. "She is outside your operations entirely," Poirot said. "I understand. I am telling you what I have ruled out, not what I have concluded." He paused. "The forger is someone who has studied Blackwell's work with technical precision and has access to aged materials and experienced the specific practical knowledge that forgery at this level requires. This is not Miss Vane, who is 27 and has been painting for 5 years. This is someone older and more practiced." He watched her think. He gave her the time to think because the direction of her thinking was itself information. "The unveiling this evening," he said.
"Blackwell intends to address the forgeries publicly, in front of you and the others. He said he would include it in what he had to say." "He will destroy my business," she said. It was a statement of fact, delivered in the tone of a professional assessment rather than a personal lament. The Frankfurt Gallery, the Vienna connection, the entire network of relationships I have spent 12 years building. Criminal proceedings, most probably. Loss of license, the end of everything. She paused. "He knows this." "He knows this," Poirot agreed. He also said, as he said to Edmund Frost, that he preferred voluntary correction to forced exposure. He gave you the same option he gave Frost, to make your own statement first if you chose. "I did not receive that option," Mrs. Voss said flatly. "No," Poirot said.
"That is what concerns me." He left her in the garden and went inside, and as he went, he thought about the specific quality of the concern he had just expressed. There was something in Mrs. Voss' response, the speed of it, the coldness of it, the assessment of damage that was very rapid and very complete. That was not the response of someone who had been offered a choice and was considering it. It was the response of someone who had already made a choice and was now measuring a complication against it. The afternoon passed. The sea light moved across the cliff top in its September way. Lower now, longer, the gold of late afternoon coming in at an angle that made everything it touched look both beautiful and transient. In the studio, behind its covered cloth, the painting waited with the patience of something that contains a great deal and has been waiting to be seen for a long time. At 4:30, Poirot spoke briefly with Tom Chegwidden, who was carrying a ladder along the outside of the cottage toward the electrical junction box on its north wall. Tom said Blackwell had asked him to check the connections before the evening. He said this with the slight puzzlement of a man who has been asked to do something for reasons he has not been given and has not asked for. Poirot looked at the junction box and thought about what Tom had said, and about the quality of Petra Voss' assessment in the garden, and the grey cells which had been moving toward a specific conclusion since Thursday morning, as arrived at it with the quiet certainty of something that has taken the correct route and found exactly what it expected at the destination. He went to find Blackwell. He had a very important thing to tell him, and very little time in which to tell it. Chapter 5. When the lights go out. The studio at 8 o'clock in the evening had been transformed by Cornelius Blackwell with the thoroughness of a man who understood that presentation was itself a form of meaning. The long work table had been cleared and set along the north wall.
7 chairs had been arranged in a slight arc facing the south wall, where the covered painting hung on the purpose-built rail that Blackwell used for his largest works.
The room was lit by a combination of the overhead electric lights and 4 substantial candles in holders that had the look of something specifically acquired rather than generally available. The effect was theatrical in the proper sense, not manufactured drama, but the arrangement of space and light to make the truth of what was about to happen appropriately visible. Poirot had spoken with Blackwell at 5 o'clock in the garden for 20 minutes. He had told him what he knew and what he suspected. Blackwell had listened with the focused attention of a man who takes information seriously and does not perform reactions until he has processed what he has been given. Then he had said, "You think she will act tonight?" "I think she has already decided to act," Poirot said. "The question is how." "And I think the how involves the electrical supply to this building, which is why she is the person who would benefit from your asking Tom to check the junction box this afternoon. Because someone who knew the junction box was going to be accessed and who had access to the tool shed where the tools are kept could arrange for the main breaker to fail at a specific time." "The darkness," Blackwell said. "A minute's darkness," Poirot said. "Sufficient for a person who knows exactly where the painting hangs and exactly where you stand when you address your guests, and who has brought something suitable for the purpose. You are telling me not to hold the unveiling. I am telling you that the unveiling, if held, should be held differently from how you intend. I have a specific suggestion." What Poirot had suggested, and what Blackwell had agreed to with the pragmatic flexibility of a man who has arranged elaborate things before and understands that arrangements require revision, was this. The covered painting on the south wall was not the painting. The actual painting had been moved by Blackwell and Poirot together in the late afternoon to the bedroom above the studio, where it was now wrapped in canvas and could not be stolen or damaged without the knowledge of the household. What hung on the south wall was a large blank canvas covered with the same cloth, indistinguishable in its covered state from the real thing. The guests assembled at 8. They took their seats in the arc of chairs with the varied expressions of people who have been building toward this moment for several days and are now in the final minutes of the anticipation phase. Lady Sylvia's composure was immaculate. Edmund Frost had the contained attention of a critic who has spent his career in the front rows of exhibitions and has learned to read the atmosphere of a room before the work is revealed. Arabella had her sketchbook, though she was not using it, holding it as a comfort object rather than a working tool. Dr. Holt's measured manner was present and doing its work, but there was behind it the specific tension of a man waiting for something he cannot prevent. Julian sat with his arms crossed and his expression configured for whatever his father was about to do, resistant but present, unable to leave even when he wished to. Mrs. Petra Voss sat in the chair nearest the door. She was immaculate. She was composed. She was, Poirot thought, watching her from his position at the side of the room, the most completely self-contained person he had seen in 30 years of watching people in difficult rooms. And this completeness was not calm, but its opposite, the surface expression of an internal mechanism running at maximum capacity. Blackwell stood before the covered canvas and addressed them. He spoke for 15 minutes. He spoke without notes, without hesitation, and without the performances of emotion that lesser people bring to serious occasions as a substitute for the serious occasion itself. He talked about 50 years of portraiture. He talked about the gap between what a painted face shows and what a real face contains. He talked about the specific decision he had made 2 years ago to paint one final work that closed that gap, that showed the people he had spent his career painting as they actually were, with the truths they actually carried rendered in the technique that he had spent 60 years refining and that had come, originally, from a man whose name most people in this room did not know and should. He paused. He reached for the cloth. The lights went out. The darkness was total. The candles, Poirot noted, had been extinguished in the same moment, which told him that the interference with the electrical supply had been more comprehensive than a simple breaker failure. The room was completely, absolutely dark for approximately 45 seconds. In that darkness, there were sounds, the collective intake of breath of 7 people simultaneously deprived of vision, then movement, the specific sound of someone who knows exactly where they are going, moving with rapid, quiet purpose. Then the lights came back. Mrs.
Petra Voss was standing at the south wall with her hands on the covered canvas, in the act of lifting it from its rail. In her right hand was a short, heavy object, a sculptor's mallet, taken from the tool cabinet near the door, which she had clearly intended to use for a purpose other than the one for which the lights had gone out. The room was entirely still. Voss looked at the canvas in her hands. She looked at the room. She looked at Poirot, who had not moved from his position at the side of the room, and who looked back at her with the expression of a man who expected precisely this and finds the confirmation more sad than satisfying. "The painting," Blackwell said from behind her. "Ton is not here." She stood for a long moment with the blank canvas in her hands and the mallet at her side, and the full weight of what she had just done, the visible, witnessed, irrevocable act of it, settling on her with the patience of things that have been waiting for exactly this moment. The mallet dropped. It hit the studio floor with a sound that the stone walls returned as an echo. Tom appeared in the doorway, as arranged, with 2 of the village constables who had been waiting in the cottage since 7 o'clock. "I think," Poirot said into the silence of the studio, "that there are still some things to be said. There are always still some things to be said." He was not wrong. Chapter 6. The Painting Speaks. The studio, after the formal business had been concluded, the constables, the preliminary questioning, the arrangements for Mrs. Voss to be held in the village until Inspector Penhaligon could come from Truro on the Sunday morning, settled into the specific quiet of a room after a crisis, which is a quiet that contains rather than excludes the memory of what has just occurred. The candles had been relit. Blackwell had replaced the blank canvas on the rail with the real one, carried down from the bedroom above and unwrapped with the care of something that has been protected and is now ready to be seen. The remaining 6 guests sat in their arc of chairs, and Tom had quietly produced brandy from somewhere, and Blackwell stood once more before the covered painting with the expression of a man who has revised his plan and found the revision adequate. "The unveiling," he said, "is somewhat altered in its circumstances. I had intended it as a confrontation. It has already been that, in a different and more direct way than I planned." He looked at the cloth. "What I still intend is to show you what I made, because it exists, and because I made it for reasons that have not changed, and because the specific truth-telling I engaged in when I painted it seems, now more than ever, to be worth completing." He drew the cloth. The painting was large, 5 feet by 4, oil on canvas, the formal dimensions of a significant portrait work applied to something that was not quite a portrait and not quite a group scene, but a specific hybrid that had no established category. The 7 figures were arranged not as in a formal group, but as they might appear in a specific room at a specific moment, recognizably themselves, recognizably together. And yet, each one also alone, in the way that people are alone even in company when they are carrying something the company does not share. The technique was, Poirot was not equipped to describe it technically, but he could feel it. The accumulated effect of Caspar Weil's method, refined through 60 years of Blackwell's application. The light built from within the shadows rather than falling on the surface, so that each face appeared to be lit from an interior source, as though the truth of the person was generating its own illumination. Lady Sylvia's figure in the painting was turned slightly from the others in a way that was barely noticeable until you looked closely.
And when you looked closely, you saw in the tilt of her painted chin and the quality of her painted gaze a specific expression that Lady Sylvia herself recognized immediately, with the unmistakable recognition of a person encountering their own carefully hidden face in an unexpected mirror. The expression was not guilt exactly, and not fear exactly, but the specific arrangement of features produced by a person who has been maintaining a fiction for a long time, and has become so practiced at maintaining it that the maintenance itself has become the dominant thing. She looked at the painting for a long time. Then she said quietly, "The detail in my brooch." "Yes," Blackwell said. It's from a photograph, from before my marriage. The brooch belonged to—" She stopped. "No one here could know what it means except me." "And me," Blackwell said. "And you need not explain it. That was the intention. It is yours to keep or share as you choose." Edmund Frost looked at his own figure in the painting with the precise attention of a critic conducting an assessment, which was, Poirot thought, both entirely characteristic and, given the circumstances, rather admirable. The painted Frost was rendered with a quality that was not unkind, but was absolutely accurate. The intelligence, the authority, the genuine love of what art could do at its finest, all of it present, and present alongside the specific compression of a man who has used a real capability for purposes that a part of him has never fully forgiven. The detail visible only to Frost was a title on a very small painted book spine in the background.
Frost looked at it for a long time. Then he said, with the economical precision that was his characteristic mode, "I intend to write the correction, a proper one, published in the same journal, in the same word count. I have been drafting it for 2 years." "I know," Blackwell said. Arabella looked at her painted self with the attention of a painter examining another painter's work, which meant she was looking at the technique as much as the subject, reading the choices made in each brushstroke with the technical literacy of someone who had made the same choices herself. The detail in her painted figure was a specific quality of light on a canvas within the canvas, a canvas painted in the background of the composition, showing a fragment of work that was rendered in Weil's method with a distinctiveness that anyone who knew the method's origin would recognize. She did not say anything immediately. She looked at the painting for several minutes. Then she said, "It's beautiful. What he did, Weil, I mean. What the technique does." She paused. "The fact that it was taken from him doesn't make what it does less beautiful. It makes it more complicated." She looked at Blackwell. "I want to know everything about him. Everything you remember." "I remember a great deal," Blackwell said. Julian was last. He stood before his painted self with the expression of a man approaching something he has been afraid of for a long time and has finally arrived at. And the fear is still there, but the arrival is its own kind of relief. The painted Julian was rendered with the most love of all the figures. It was visible, unmistakably, in the quality of attention the painter had brought to this specific face, and the detail visible only to Julian was in the painted hands. The specific way they were held, which was Catherine Blackwell's gesture, her exact gesture, the one she had always made when she was at ease, preserved in the son's hands, with the completeness of something that passes between generations without either party knowing it is being transmitted. Julian looked at the hands for a very long time. Then he looked at his father. The look was, Poirot, who had watched a great deal of human exchange over a long career, found himself without a precise category for it. It was not forgiveness, which would have required an offence. And what Julian had believed was an offence had not, in the event, been one. It was something more fundamental than forgiveness, recognition. The specific disorienting recognition of a person who has been looking at something the wrong way for years and has suddenly seen it as it actually is. Blackwell looked back at his son with the expression of a man who has been waiting 13 years for this specific moment and had not been certain it would come. Poirot looked at the fire and thought about the difference between truth and its timing, which was a subject the last several days had given him substantial new material to consider. Chapter 7. Secrets Kept and Secrets Released. Inspector Penhaligon arrived from Truro on the Sunday morning. In a motor car that he had driven with the concentration of a man who has been summoned to a situation involving both an art forgery conspiracy and an attempted assault on a painting, and who is not yet entirely certain in which direction his primary professional attention should be directed. He was a capable man, Penhaligon, lean, direct,
with the thorough competence of a Cornish policeman who has dealt with everything that remoteness and sea and human nature combine to produce, and who has learned that thoroughness and patience are more reliably useful than brilliance. He received Poirot's written summary, which had been prepared with the methodical completeness of a man who had been awake since 5 and had used the time productively, and he read it twice without comment. "The forger," he said when he had finished.
"Is the question that requires resolution," Poirot agreed. Mrs. Voss operated the commercial network. She did not make the paintings. The level of technical skill in the forgeries, I have examined photographs of 2 of them, obtained through a contact of Blackwell's at the Royal Academy, is consistent with a painter of long experience working in a specific mastered technique. The Weil method, as taught by Blackwell, but practiced over many years rather than recently acquired. Someone older. Someone who had contact with Blackwell's work over a long period, sufficient to develop a forger's proficiency. And someone who had a commercial relationship with Mrs.
Voss that predated her involvement with Blackwell. He laid before Penhaligon a sequence of reasoning that had assembled itself during the small hours with the particular cleanness of a structure that has been building for days and has found its final form. The forgeries had begun 9 years ago. Mrs. Voss's dealing in Blackwell's work had begun 12 years ago. In the 3-year gap, she had been operating primarily in German expressionist work through her Frankfurt base, with a secondary interest in British artists working in a continental style. The names she had dealt in during that period were recorded in auction catalogues from the period, which Poirot had obtained by telegraph through his London contact. One name appeared in both lists, the Continental period and the Blackwell period. An elderly German painter,
a resident in Cornwall since 1920, who had studied under Weil in Munich before the war, and who had continued, in retirement, to paint in Weil's method, the only other living practitioner of it that Blackwell had been aware of, a man he had mentioned in passing to Poirot on the Thursday evening, describing him as a contemporaneous student whose work he occasionally visited and whose technique was, if anything, more faithful to the original than his own. A man who lived, Poirot had established, in a village 6 miles along the coast. His name is Heinrich Müller, Poirot said. He is 71 in poor health and has been, I believe, producing the forgeries for Mrs. Voss from the beginning of the arrangement. He has the technique, he has the materials knowledge, and he has, I suspect,
given his age and his health, a financial situation that made the arrangement not merely attractive but necessary. Penhaligon looked at him. "You feel sympathy for him." "I feel sympathy for the situation," Poirot said carefully, "which is not the same thing and does not alter the legal facts. He has produced fraudulent works sold under another man's name, and people have paid significant sums for them on false premises, and this is a wrong, regardless of the circumstances that produced it." He paused. "But the circumstances are the circumstances. An old man, far from home, in poor health, with a technique that the world did not value under his own name, and that someone was willing to pay for under another's. The full picture is complex." Penhaligon said nothing for a moment, which was his way of acknowledging that complexity without resolving it. "I'll need to speak with him. He will not be difficult to find. He will not, I think, be difficult to speak with. He is a man who has been carrying this for 9 years, and people who have been carrying things for 9 years generally experience a specific quality of relief when the carrying is over, even when the cessation is not on their own terms. The household at Cliffside was subdued, but not distressed. Subdued in the way of a group of people who have been through a significant shared experience and are in the process of assimilating it, which takes time and cannot be hurried. Lady Sylvia had come down to breakfast with the composed beauty that was her habitual presentation, and there was something behind it this morning that Poirot found marginally different from the previous days, a slight loosening, as though the removal of the threat, the painting's revelation, the exposure she had feared, had released a tension that had been structural for so long it had become invisible. Poirot sat beside her on the terrace after breakfast in the Sunday morning sun. "The detail in the brooch," he said,
It is not something I need to know about." She looked at him with the assessment of a woman who has spent decades managing people's access to information about her. "But you could find out." "I could. I choose not to." He looked at the sea. "The painting shows what it shows. The specific private content of each detail is yours to do with as you choose." Blackwell made the painting to show the truth.
He did not make it to hand the truth to the world as an instrument. He made it to show each of you that he had seen you. Whether you do anything with that seeing is not his decision and not mine. She was quiet for a moment. "It was from before my marriage," she said. "The brooch. From a person who I was before I became Lady Sylvia Rowe. The person who exists before society gets hold of one." She paused. "He painted that person, not the one who has been performing for 30 years. She looked at the sea. "It is strange to be seen." "Most people," Poirot said, "find it strange the first time. Some find it the only thing worth having once they have experienced it." She didn't respond to this directly, but she looked at the sea with an expression that was, for the first time since Poirot had met her, entirely her own.
Chapter 8. The Artist's True Portrait. Julian Blackwell found Poirot on the cliff path on the Sunday afternoon, in the specific way that people find each other when they have been independently arriving at the same destination from different directions. He was walking without the crossed arms and the configured expression, walking, Poirot thought, as his actual self rather than the self he deployed in his father's presence, and the difference was considerable. "Dr. Holt told me," Julian said, without preamble. "Last night, after the others had gone to bed, he sat with me in the kitchen and told me everything." Poirot walked beside him in silence, which was the appropriate response. "She asked him," Julian said. "She asked him herself, and he agreed, and my father was with her." He walked for a moment without speaking.
The cliff path here ran close to the edge, and the sea below was the specific deep green of Cornish autumn water, cold and entirely beautiful. "I have spent 13 years believing my father's inattention, his work, his inability to be a proper domestic presence had killed her, that she had declined and he had not noticed sufficiently." He paused. "That was wrong." "It was what you had to work with," Poirot said. "It was what I chose to construct from what I had." Julian looked at the sea. "That's different. I was angry, and anger selects its evidence." He was quiet for a moment. She was in pain. She had been in pain for 4 years, and she was the clearest person I have ever known. If she decided clearly and completely that she had had enough, that is not something I can in honesty dispute." He paused.
"And I can mourn it. I can wish it had been different, but I cannot. Call it wrong. And your father." Julian was quiet for a long time. The path curved around a headland, and the full Atlantic opened ahead. The enormous, indifferent, magnificent fact of it. "He protected Holt for 13 years, Julian said. At the cost of me believing what I believed about him." He stopped. "He could have told me at any time. He chose not to because telling me would have exposed Holt." He paused. That is the act of a man who values someone else's protection more than his own son's good opinion of him." "Yes," Poirot said, "it is." "I don't know what to do with that," Julian said honestly. "You do not have to know yet," Poirot said. "It is a new truth. New truths require time. The grey cells require time. Even when they are working correctly." Julian almost smiled. It was, Poirot noted, his mother's smile. The same quality of it that was in the painted hands, brief and genuine and slightly surprised at itself. "He wants to paint my portrait," Julian said. "He asked me this morning. A real one, not a commission, not a flattering lie. A real one, the way he painted the others." He paused. "I said I would think about it." "That is the correct answer," Poirot said. The remaining conversation of the Sunday was conducted in the various pairs and combinations that naturally form when a group of people have been through something together and are in the process of determining what they are to each other on the far side of it. Edmund Frost and Arabella Vane spent 2 hours in the studio, with the painting visible and unhidden, discussing Caspar Weil, what Frost knew of the historical record, what Arabella knew of the technique, what both of them knew of what it meant to build something on a foundation whose provenance was complicated. It was, Poirot thought, passing the studio door and hearing fragments of it, one of the more productive conversations of the weekend. Dr. Stephen Holt sat with Cornelius Blackwell on the terrace in the afternoon sun, and their conversation was the conversation of 40 years of friendship that has just passed through a significant new room and is assessing, with the comprehensive ease of long acquaintance, what the new room contains and how to furnish it. They spoke in the economical shorthand of people who have said most of the important things already and are now doing the maintenance. Poirot sat with them for a while,
not speaking, drinking his tisane in the September sun, while the sea below conducted its perpetual argument with the Cornish granite, and the light moved across the cliff face with the slow, authoritative progress of light that has no appointments to keep and no schedule to maintain. "You came here on holiday," Blackwell said. "I came here on holiday," Poirot confirmed. "And you have had—" "I have had," Poirot said, "rather more than I intended and rather less than I expected, which is in my experience the definition of the appropriate outcome." Blackwell laughed. Holt smiled. The sea continued. "The painting," Poirot said. "What will become of it?" Blackwell looked at the cottage and through it to the studio. "I thought I would exhibit it. I thought the exhibition was the point, the public seeing the truth made available." He paused. "I am less certain of that now. The seeing happened. The truth was available to the people it was painted for. Whether it requires a wider audience is a question I am revising. There are people in it who would prefer it not to be exhibited. Yes, and their preference has some weight, which is not a consideration I gave sufficient attention to in the planning." He was quiet for a moment. "Arabella should have it. When I'm done. She is the one who will understand it most completely, technically and otherwise." "She will be grateful," Poirot said. "She will also be honest about what she does with it, which is the more important quality." "Yes," Blackwell agreed. "The honesty is the more important quality. It always is." The afternoon continued its beautiful, valedictory progress. Heinrich Müller, Poirot would learn the following week,
had spoken to Inspector Penhaligon with the relief of a man depositing a weight he had been carrying too long and was glad to be done with whatever came next. The legal process would take its time and arrive at its outcome, which would not be simple and would probably be less severe than a straightforward accounting of the facts deserved, because the full picture was, as Poirot had said, complex. Mrs. Petra Voss faced rather more direct consequences, being younger and having fewer mitigating circumstances in the specific legal sense, and being a person who had organized rather than merely participated. She would face them, Poirot thought, with the same efficient composure she brought to everything. It was not an admirable quality in this context, but it was a genuine one.
The September light was as good on Sunday as it had been on every other day of the week, which was the light's indifferent gift to everyone below it. Chapter 9. The Sea Remains. Monday arrived with a clarity that the weekend, with its density of event, had not had occasion to produce. The sea below cliffside was the dark blue of deep water on a still morning, perfectly reflective. The horizon, a sharp line between the sea's blue and the skies, a line so clean it looked like something a painter had put there, which in a sense it was, being the work of the same light that Cornelius Blackwell had been chasing along this coastline for 20 years. Poirot had his morning tisane on the terrace alone, which was how he preferred to conduct the final morning of any significant visit, in the quiet of a place that has disclosed itself to him.
Taking a kind of mental inventory before the departure that would close the chapter. The inventory was his private habit, conducted without notes, in the silence of his own grey cells, reviewing what had been found and what had been resolved and what remained, as some things always did, in the category of the unresolved and probably unresolvable. The painting was in the studio, unhidden, exactly as Blackwell had hung it on Saturday evening after its recovery. Poirot had sat before it for an hour on the Sunday night after the household had gone to bed, alone in the studio with the candles burning and the sea audible through the north wall and the 7 faces looking back at him from the canvas with the quality of people who have had their truth acknowledged and are, in whatever way truth can be, at rest. He had looked at the empty space in the composition where Mrs. Petra Voss's figure would have been. Blackwell had included her, a full figure with the same treatment as the others, and Poirot had examined her painted face with the attention of someone seeing a person as both who they were and what they had done simultaneously. The detail visible only to her, or that would have been visible only to her, was in the painted fingers. A very small catalogue number, the kind that appears on the reverse of auction house lots, rendered in such minute precision that it required close examination to see at all. The number referred, Blackwell had told him, to the first forgery that had passed through her gallery.
The first sale in the 9-year arrangement that had produced the 23 works and the considerable money and the systematic betrayal of a painter's name and reputation. She had not seen it. She had attempted to destroy the painting before seeing it, which was itself a kind of revelation. A person who knew their own truth well enough to know they did not want it rendered visible, even by a painter they had trusted. Cornelius Blackwell came out to the terrace at 8 with his own coffee and the unhurried quality of a man who has been awake for some time and is in no hurry about the morning. He sat across from Poirot with the ease of a person for whom the formalities of acquaintance have been comprehensively superseded by the events of the past several days. "You're leaving today," he said.
"The 12:15 from Perranporth," Poirot confirmed. "Tom has arranged the motor car." "I owe you—" "You owe me nothing," Poirot said, with the pleasantness of someone declining a payment they never sought. "You invited me. I came. The events of the week were not of my manufacture, and the resolution of them was the work of many people, including yourself. I put you in a dangerous situation. I knew there was a possibility of violence, and I used your presence as a deterrent rather than telling you directly what I feared." "That is true," Poirot said. "It wasn't entirely correct of you. However, I had formed my own assessment of the situation by Wednesday and had made my own arrangements accordingly. Your less than full disclosure was inconvenient rather than consequential." He paused.
"I will say that a direct conversation earlier in the week would have been preferable." "You would have come earlier to the same conclusions regardless." "Yes, but the courtesy of being told the full situation would have been—" "A courtesy?" Blackwell said. "Yes, I apologize for it. I have, in my life, been somewhat constitutionally unable to share the stage of my own productions." He smiled, the large, undeterred smile. "It is a professional deformation." "It is a human one," Poirot said. "More common than the profession." The remaining guests departed across the Monday morning. Edmund Frost left first, with the same brevity with which he had arrived, but with something different behind it. Not the compressed containment of a man managing an internal tension, but the quality of someone who has made a decision and is moving toward its implementation. He had, he told Poirot at the door, already written the first paragraph of the correction. He said this without seeking reassurance about it, which Poirot found the most reassuring thing about it. Lady Sylvia left with the warmth she brought to everything, and it had this morning the quality of something more genuinely offered than the warmth of the previous week, which had been genuinely offered but more carefully measured. She kissed Blackwell on both cheeks and told him the painting was the finest thing she had seen in 20 years, and that she meant this without the qualifications she usually attached to such statements. Arabella left last among the guests after spending the final morning in the studio with Blackwell, ostensibly discussing the vial technique and its history, but actually, Poirot suspected, beginning the longer conversation that would occupy both of them for some time to come, the question of what it means to build on a foundation that was constructed from something taken, and how one proceeds when the truth of the foundation has been acknowledged and the building itself has value that is independent of its provenance. Dr. Holt said goodbye to Poirot with the specific quality of a man expressing gratitude for something that cannot be directly named. He had looked that morning lighter, not happier.
Precisely. The conversation with Julian had been the work of the previous night and had cost him in the ways that necessary truths always cost, but lighter in the sense of a man who has been relieved of a carrying that he had been doing for so long he had ceased to feel its weight and had only now, in its absence, understood how heavy it had been. Julian was last. He was staying another week. His father had asked him to, and he had agreed, which was itself the most significant development of the weekend. He and Blackwell were standing on the terrace when Tom brought Poirot's bag to the waiting motorcar, and Poirot paused for a moment to look at them. Two large men, side by side, with the sea behind them and the September light on both of them.
And between them something that was neither resolved nor unresolved but simply present, acknowledged, visible, real. He got in the motor car. Tom drove him down the coast road toward Perranporth with the comfortable efficiency of a man who knows the roads and has no agenda about them. They passed through 3 small villages and 2 stretches of moor and one extraordinary view of the sea that Poirot allowed himself to look at with the appropriate appreciation of a man who has been told he is on holiday and is making a final genuine effort. "Did you enjoy Cornwall, sir?" Tom asked, as they reached the outskirts of Perranporth. Poirot considered this. "Cornwall was exactly what Cornwall is," he said, "which is to say, more beautiful than I expected, more dramatic than I wanted, and considerably more interesting than I had any right to request." He looked at the approaching town. "I believe I shall return." "The light's good in October too," Tom said. "Different kind of good. Softer, less, what's the word?" "Relentless," Poirot offered. "That's it." Tom turned the car toward the station. "September's relentless, October's honest." Poirot thought about this as the station appeared ahead, and the Truro train was visible in the distance, making its patient way along the coastal line, and the Atlantic was still present as a sound and a light and a quality of air even here, 3 streets from the water. Honest, he thought. October was honest. He bought his ticket, settled into his first-class compartment. He accepted the cup of tea that the steward produced with the slightly defiant pride of a great Western railway man who does not intend to be outclassed on matters of hot beverages, and looked out at the Cornish landscape passing in the afternoon light. The grey cells were quiet. They were not inactive. They were never entirely inactive. But they had that particular quality of satisfaction that comes after a significant problem has been resolved, and the resolution has been not merely correct but complete. The facts established, the responsible parties appropriately addressed, the truths that needed to be spoken, and the ones that needed to be kept appropriately kept. Somewhere behind him, in a studio on a cliff above the sea, a painting hung on a wall and showed 7 people as they actually were. It would remain there for a time. Eventually, it would pass to Arabella Vane, who would keep it with the care of a painter who understands what it costs to make and what it means that it exists. The truth, Poirot thought, as the train curved north toward Plymouth and the sea briefly disappeared and then appeared again. Different angle, same sea. The truth had its own life, independent of the people who had worked so hard to keep it hidden. It waited. It persisted. It found eventually the painter or the archivist or the detective who was constitutionally unable to leave it alone. He finished his tea and was entirely satisfied with it, which in Cornwall was the appropriate conclusion to almost everything. Fin.